Good evening, everyone. Before we drift off to sleep in our warm and peaceful rooms, let's open a door to the past. A life without heating, without telephones, and without soft quilts. There, the cold was not just a feeling, but a threat that lurked with every breath. Together, we will explore the extraordinary lives of medieval peasants. Seemingly ordinary people, but with a resilience and wisdom that we rarely recognize today. They were unsung heroes, living in mud and straw huts where each winter night was a battle for survival. There was no technology, no heating, no comforts, other than their calloused hands, a small fire, and a spirit that never gave up. From finding ways to keep warm with hay and cow dung, to sleeping close together with their families, even their pets, every detail of their lives was a testament to the extraordinary adaptability and endurance of humans. So, if you're listening to this from a warm blanket, with a soft lamplight and a cup of tea in your hand, allow yourself to imagine. What would it be like to spend a winter night without these things? In the bitter winter months of the Middle Ages, the life of a peasant was more than just harsh. It was a constant battle between man and nature, between life and the cold. In that world, the so-called home, their only shelter, is not a truly warm place. They were little more than flimsy shells cobbled together from whatever they could find around the village. Most peasant houses were built using the wattle and daub technique, thick bamboo woven together and plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. It was a primitive, cheap construction and easy to build by unskilled labor. But when winter came, the walls could not keep out the cold wind, moisture, or ice from all directions. Without insulation, without glass doors, luxuries for the poor, they could only use thin, hard, dry animal skins to cover the windows. But even that skin could not stop the piercing wind at night. The roofs were often thatched with straw, a cheap and readily available option, but they rotted, caught fire, and were especially prone to leaking. The winter rains were not heavy, but persistent and cold. Just a few drops of water seeping through the thatched roof were enough to numb the whole night. Not only water, but rats, a familiar enemy in every peasant house, often crawled under the thatched roof, then fell into the middle of people's sleep, like a harsh reminder that you are never really safe under your own roof. Worse still was the floor. Instead of bricks or wood, the floor was just a layer of hardened earth. In the summer, dust flew up. In the winter, the rain turned to cold mud. The damp floor soaked into clothes, shoes, blankets, and gradually into people's skin. It was not like the cold outside. It was slow, silent, but persistent and deep into the marrow. Rising from a sleep on the dirt floor, people not only struggled with the numbness of their limbs, but also with the thought, would they have enough strength to survive another cold day? The medieval peasant's winter was therefore not just about the weather. It was a comprehensive challenge from the roof, walls, ceiling, floor, air, and every corner of life. But what kept them going, from the survival instinct, was also the belief that spring, though late, would eventually come. In the cold of the medieval winter, people easily imagined the bitter wind outside, the leaky roof, or the fragile walls that could not retain warmth. But there was a silent, smoldering enemy that quietly crept into every joint, every breath. The floor. It sounded harmless, but the very ground that people stepped on every day was the source of the deepest and most persistent cold in the entire house. The floors of ancient peasant houses were not paved with stone or wood, and did not have the insulation we are familiar with today. It is simply earth, natural soil that has been pounded down to make it smooth, often damp, rough, and cold. When winter comes, the cold air comes not only from the wind that blows through the roof or walls, but also from the ground itself. The cold from the ground does not whistle through the skin like the wind, but creeps in slowly and deeply. It numbs the feet, the bones and joints are sore, and every step feels like stepping on a thin layer of ice. To overcome this, people have come up with many simple but clever ways. They spread a layer of straw, hay, or dry grass on the ground, what they call natural carpet. These layers of materials are not luxurious, not soft, but at least create a fragile distance between the body and the ground, helping to retain a little warmth during the winter night. However, everything has its price. Straw and hay are very susceptible to mold when exposed to moisture, especially during the days of continuous rain. And once moldy, they not only lose their insulation function, but also become an ideal habitat for insects such as bugs, ticks, and bedbugs. Creatures that can turn an already cold sleep into an itchy and uncomfortable nightmare. And so the floor, which seems to be the most stable foundation, becomes a silent threat. Not as noisy as the wind or as cold as the snow, but day by day, it eats away at the health and spirit of those who live in it. The feet. The first place to contact the ground, are also the place that feels the invasion of cold most clearly. Waking up every morning and setting foot on the ground is a challenge, not only physical, but also mental. In a world where every square meter struggles to stay alive, the ground underfoot, which seems solid, is the thing that tests human will in the most silent and fierce way. That is why those who overcome the cold are not only physically strong, but also true survivors, from the bottom up, from the roots. In the bitter cold of the medieval winter, between the flimsy houses and the howling winds that seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing, the only thing that could retain a little bit of warmth, both literally and spiritually, was the fire in the fireplace. Although it was just a hollow pit filled with simple charcoal, the fireplace was still considered the smoldering heart of the house, where all family members gathered, shared, and fought against the cold outside. However, the peasant fireplaces of that time were nothing like the warm image we often imagine. There was no chimney to lead the smoke outside, so every time the fire burned, the whole room was engulfed in a gray, stinging, and suffocating smoke. The air in the house was so thick with the smell of ash, burning wood, and smoldering smoke that just a breath could make you cough and choke. But paradoxically, that very smoke, which seemed to be a threat to the lungs and eyes, inadvertently became a natural defense against other silent enemies: insects, fleas, mosquitoes, ticks. In a damp and cold environment, there was nothing more terrifying than being bitten or infected, and smoke, though toxic, was the most effective defense they had. When night fell, keeping the fire alive was a task that could not be neglected. The fire was not allowed to go out, not only because of the cold, but because it was the boundary between hope and despair. Therefore, they used a technique called fire banking, burying ashes and smoldering embers deep in the cold ash to retain heat overnight. That way, the next morning, they could just gently stir up the ash to start a new fire, without much effort or fuel. This was a very ingenious innovation, demonstrating the meticulous observation and ability to make use of every last bit of energy of the poor farmer. But the fire, no matter how small, needed someone to keep it. During the long, cold night, every member of the family, from the elderly to the young, had to take turns waking up to tend the fire. No one slept well, because the price of a deep sleep could be a morning without a fire, a worse cough, or even a person never waking up again. Keeping watch over the fire is not just a duty, but a silent ritual that shows love and responsibility, because every time a person wakes up in the night to add firewood, they are not only keeping the fire for themselves, but also keeping their family warm. That fire, dim, flickering, is the most vivid proof of human perseverance in the midst of the brutal winter. In a world without technology, without electricity, without conveniences, just a small spark is enough to hold on to life. And in that small act, keeping the fire from going out, people have preserved more than warmth. They have preserved hope, connection, and faith in tomorrow. In the bitter cold of the medieval winter, when the cold wind penetrates through every fragile wall, when the floor is as wet as a layer of underground ice, and when even a small fire cannot warm the whole house, people are forced to find the most primitive way to survive. That is the warmth from each other. With no other choice, the whole family, and sometimes even the pets, huddle together in a small space, lying close together like logs in a cold forest. On nights like these, the children and the elderly, the most fragile and vulnerable, are always placed in the middle, where it is warmest, surrounded by the bodies of the younger ones on either side. This arrangement is not accidental, but a practical survival strategy, reflecting the instinctive human protection of the weakest members of the group. The younger ones, with their greater endurance, will endure the cold more, lying at the edges like a living wall of flesh, blocking the draft and keeping the center of the makeshift nest warm. In such circumstances, the concept of privacy is completely erased. There is no private room, no private bed, no curtain or wall to separate. What used to be considered the bare minimum for personal comfort has become a luxury. All differences of age, gender, and emotions were erased. Because at that moment, only one thing mattered: surviving the night. And in that forced closeness, family affection was silently and intensely nurtured. No need to say it. No need to confess. Just the steady breathing of the person next to you, the rustling of the torn blanket, or the warmth from the skin next to you was enough to soothe the cold that seeped into every joint. Sleeping together to keep warm. It sounds simple, but it was the clearest proof of the spirit of solidarity and the will to survive of people at that time. When there was nothing left between people and the harsh winter, it was the love and connection of body and soul that became the last wall separating them from death. And in the darkness of those cold nights, people found light, not from fire, but from each other. In the harsh medieval world, where every winter wind not only brought cold but also a warning from nature that no one was allowed to be weak, people were forced to make use of every possible resource to sustain life. And one of those practical, bold, and instinctive measures was to bring animals into the house, not to raise, but to sleep with. To us today, the idea of sleeping with cows, goats, pigs, or even chickens may seem strange, even unhygienic. But for medieval farmers, it was a way to survive. The animals were not only valuable assets for plowing, milking, and meat, but also living heaters, constantly emitting natural, steady, and free heat. When a cold house ran out of coal, or the fireplace was too weak to heat, the body warmth of the livestock lying nearby was the only thing that kept people from freezing to death at night. Not only that, the animals also acted as silent night watchmen. Every strange noise, every suspicious footstep outside the door could set off a barking dog, a squealing chicken, or a startling pig, creating primitive but effective alarm signals. In a time when locks were absent, guards were scarce, and unrest was rife, bringing pets into the home was not just a way to keep warm, but also an innovative security measure. A sudden squawk of a rooster or a snort of a cow in the middle of the night could be enough to make a burglar hesitate, allowing the family to escape danger by the skin of their teeth. To be sure, living with animals was not pleasant. Their stench, their cries, their droppings, and the mess they made could make an already cramped space even more oppressive. But when the price was life and death, everything made sense. People were willing to sacrifice cleanliness, privacy, even peaceful sleep, just to get a little warmth, a little security. So in the deep gaze of medieval winter, bringing pets into the house was not just a habit, but a symbol of human adaptability. That is when the boundary between humans and nature is erased, when life no longer distinguishes between noble and lowly species, only the common desire to be warm, to be safe, and to live one more day. In the medieval world, where cold was not just a weather phenomenon but a real enemy, winter clothing was not simply a matter of fashion or aesthetics. It was the last line of defense between man and the icy storm. Poor peasants did not have the luxury of tailoring or stockpiling warm clothing that we have today. They fought off the winter with everything they had: layers of thick woolen sweaters, hand-woven leggings, and especially sheepskin coats. Heavy and rough, but indispensable treasures during the frigid months. Unlike modern clothing, which is frequently washed and smells fresh, the winter clothes of ancient peasants were hardly washed all season long. This was not because they did not care about hygiene, but because they had discovered a very practical phenomenon. The layer of dirt, sweat, and natural oils that accumulated over time actually helped retain heat. It forms a living layer of insulation. It smells and feels unpleasant, but it prevents the body from losing heat too quickly. A discolored, stiff shirt is sometimes more useful than a clean but flimsy shirt in the first cold wind of the season. Shoes, for them, are not always available, and when they are often crude, easily torn, and not strong enough to withstand wet ground and cold mud. So they get creative by wrapping rags, animal skins, or thick cloth around their feet. This wrapping not only keeps them warm, but also helps protect their feet from cracks caused by cold and moisture. Each wrap is a layer of protection, a little warmth, a silent but resilient effort to survive. In each item of clothing we see a story of adaptation. Medieval peasants had no technology, no modern science, but they had intuition, traditional experience, and a strangely strong survival instinct. Each layer of clothing, each piece of rag wrapped around the feet, each stain on the collar, all are not only a manifestation of poverty, but also living proof of the ability to turn poverty into strength. And so, in the long and bitter winter days, clothing is not just for wearing. It is a part of survival. It is an invisible armor that protects them from the cold, a shell that shields the body from the harshness of nature, and most importantly, a testament to the unyielding perseverance of humans in the face of challenges. In the bitter cold of the medieval winter, where every gust of wind is enough to make the chest contract and the breath freeze in the chest, people do not only fight with firewood or thick clothes, but also have to learn to control even the most natural thing, their own breath. Breathing, an unconscious act, in the harsh winter becomes a real survival skill, requiring attention and instinctive regulation. On nights when the temperature drops to rock bottom, deep breathing through the mouth not only causes a sore throat, but also causes the lungs to go into cold shock, a dangerous condition that can lead to prolonged coughing, bronchitis, and even death if the body is weak. Therefore, ancient people were taught to breathe slowly and gently through the nose, not to relax, but to warm the air before it goes deep into the body. The nasal passages, with their small sinuses and mucous membranes, will help retain some of the warmth, soften the cold, and prevent the lungs from being numbed by the cold air from outside. And to further support that technique, people use a scarf or piece of cloth wrapped around their face when sleeping. A crude but effective filter to warm the air as soon as it touches the skin. Just a layer of old cloth, sometimes a rag, loosely covering the nose and mouth, is enough to create a thin but precious barrier, helping to retain a little warmth around the nose, slowing the cold air from rushing straight into the lungs. In a world without thermal masks or heaters, that simple piece of cloth is the silent medical device, saving countless lives through the harsh cold nights. And so, breathing, which is a biological instinct, under the cold of the medieval winter, has become another testament to the soft intelligence and brave survival spirit of humans. From the way of breathing to each scarf wrapped when sleeping, everything reflects the flexibility and sophistication that no modern textbook can teach. It is knowledge distilled from experience, from suffering, and from a deep understanding that sometimes just one wrong breath can be the boundary between life and death. And in the silence of that winter, it is the breathing, slow, steady, deliberate, that helps many people quietly go through the long, cold nights, carrying with them both strength and hope. In the bitter cold of medieval winter, when every gust of wind penetrated the walls of straw, and when the fire in the stove was only enough to warm a small corner of the house, keeping the body warm did not depend only on clothing or shelter, but also on the inside, through each simple but calculated meal. Peasants had no concept of calories, but through their experience, they understood one thing very well. A full stomach, even with just a little hot food, could create warmth that lasted until morning. Therefore, eating dinner became a survival ritual, not to be missed before crawling under the straw blanket. A bowl of thick porridge, a simple stew, or a slice of salted meat, even if it was a poor dish, was an effective remedy to warm the body from the inside. Winter was a time when food was scarce, but people always tried to keep cold-resistant vegetables such as turnips, onions, or anything that could be preserved for a long time. They are simple ingredients, but when simmered in a clay pot, they release a rustic aroma and enough nutrition to satisfy hunger and warm up even the coldest nights. Salted meat, a rare product of autumn slaughters, was considered winter gold. The dried, salted, sometimes smoked slices of meat were not only eaten, but also divided into small pieces, added to porridge or stew to increase fat and flavor. And of all these ingredients, fat, which seemed redundant, was the most valuable source of energy. A little lard, a few drops of beef fat dripped into the stew not only made the dish fragrant, but also provided a large amount of calories to help the body cope with the prolonged cold. In the eyes of modern people, fat is often avoided. But for the medieval people, It was indispensable if they wanted to survive the winter. Winter nutrition, therefore, was not only to fill the stomach but also to survive. Each bite was carefully selected and preserved. Each stew was slowly cooked like a ritual, where the whole family sat around and shared spoonfuls of hot porridge, not only to warm the stomach, but also to warm the spirit. When the fire has gone out, the clothes are old, the blankets are thin, then the last meal of the day is the silent fire burning in the body, keeping the heart beating unceasingly in the long cold winter night. And so, in the small kitchens, the blue smoke of the afternoon, mixed with the smell of stew, spreads into traces of memories that many generations will remember. It is not only a feeling of fullness, but also a testament to the wisdom of the poor, who know how to turn little into enough, and turn poverty into the strength to sustain an entire winter. When the winter nights cover the medieval countryside with cold darkness and silence, when the sound of the wind whistling through the thatched roof sounds like a terrifying whisper from the invisible world, then within four fragile earthen walls, people, no matter how resilient, still cannot help but feel small and helpless. In such circumstances, when the firewood is not enough to warm, when all material efforts seem to reach their limits, people turn to their last refuge, faith. Belief in the life of medieval peasants was not a formal ritual, but a part of their flesh and blood, an essential need equal to food and clothing. Every night before going to bed, between the flickering fire and the cold seeping from the dirt floor, they sat together to pray. Not long prayers or lofty philosophies, but simple, earnest prayers, hoping that the fire would not go out in the middle of the night, hoping that the roof would not be blown away by the wind, hoping that the cold outside would not creep in. And further, hoping that their family would be safe until the next morning. In each prayer, we hear trembling, hope, and even surrender to forces beyond human capacity. Nature, illness, death. Not stopping at prayers, people also practiced many symbolic rituals to ward off evil spirits and keep their spirits warm. A little holy water was sprinkled around the windows and corners of the house as a protective boundary against invisible misfortunes. Candles were lit, not only to illuminate, but also as lamps of the heart turned towards divine protection. And on the door frames, holy signs, drawn in charcoal, in chalk, or simply by trembling hands, appearing as an invisible wall blocking evil, cold, and even fear. Faith does not make winter less cold, but it makes people's minds less lonely. In that silent kneeling, they not only communicate with God or the saints, but also remind each other, we are not alone. There is something higher, wider, listening, observing, and sometimes just the feeling of being heard is enough for a person to endure another night. And so, in the poor mud house, where the fire flickers and the walls tremble in the wind, the true light comes not only from the burning wood, but also from faith. A different kind of fire, smoldering in the heart, not extinguished no matter how cold the wind is. In a world where people are so small before nature, it is faith that makes up part of the strength, keeping them not only alive, but also hopeful in the endless winter. When the night falls, when the fire dies in the stove, and the wind blows through the cold cracks in the walls, people cannot always overcome winter. No matter how hard they fight, there are times when the cold overcomes every layer of straw, every worn blanket, every last bit of warmth left in the chest. Sometimes winter is still the absolute winner, cruel, silent, and unforgiving. In the small houses in the wilderness, many people have died of hunger, disease, and cold to the point of paralysis. There are families who, when found, are only stiffened bodies, embracing each other in their last breath, as if that embrace is the last fortress against the cruelty of fate. But the most miraculous thing is, not everyone falls. There are people who have survived, not because they are stronger, but because they are more united, more willing to share, and constantly invent to adapt. It was they, those small, nameless people, who left behind a priceless legacy, a spirit of resilience, unconditional solidarity, and an instinctive intelligence honed through hardship. These values are not found in books, but in every way a fire is lit, every act of sharing a blanket, every prayer that rings out in the dark. Today, when we live in a house with a heater, wearing clean, warm clothes, with electricity, running water, and all the amenities, let us remember that life did not come from nothing. It is the result of many previous generations who endured the cold so that we could be warm, who endured hunger so that we could be full, who lived, died, and sacrificed not only for themselves, but also for a tomorrow without cold. And if there is anything that truly distinguishes us from the past, it is not technology, it is gratitude. Because it is gratitude that keeps that fire burning, no matter how long the winter. And so, when we look back at the harsh journey that medieval farmers experienced during the long winters, we see not only the coldness of the weather, but also felt the smoldering heat of resilience, what kept them alive in the dark and cold. The tattered huts, the moldy straw, the flickering fires kept alive every night, were not only symbols of poverty, but also evidence of a strong will to survive that overcame fate. Today we live in sturdy houses, with heating, lights, wind-proof windows, warm beds, and abundant food, all of which seem obvious but are actually the result of generations of endurance, overcoming the harshest winters to pass on to us a safer world. And if there is one final lesson to keep from all these cold stories, it is this. In the most difficult times, it is humanity, sharing and trust, not material things, that keep us warm and alive. No matter what era, those values are always a flame that never goes out. And you are still lying in the soft darkness. The dream has dragged you too far. Let me continue to take you on a journey into a world that you have probably never imagined. A dark, dangerous world of medieval assassins. No longer are there the enchanting images in movies, no more fluttering cloaks or leaps from houses in the dim moonlight. Here, in the dark corridors of castles, in the smelly and cold alleys, are where quiet figures pass by, leaving no trace, just in exchange for a chance to survive. And a little coin is not enough to buy faith. You see, Hollywood has made assassins into a symbol of intoxication and charm, but the truth is much more heartbreaking. Being a medieval investigator is not glorious. It is a job that is wounded, dangerous, despised, rejected, and almost impossible to escape. No one is born to hold a knife in the dark. No one dreams of sleeping in a bedroom and then hiding in a wooden box among the trash for 3 days just to earn a few bucks. People who do this don't start out with a choice. They end up there, when all other options have long since closed. It's the last stop on the train of life, where only the remains of a person are left. So before you relax, before you let yourself be sucked into the screen of any strange night, hit a like, subscribe if you really like what I'm sharing. And if you like, leave a comment. Where are you listening from, and what time is it? It's always interesting to me to know that I'm telling stories to people from all corners of the world. Now turn off the lights, turn on the fan that creates a gentle breeze in the background, and join me on this strange journey of the night. But first, there is one thing you need to understand. No one in the Middle Ages woke up one day, yawned, and thought, "Today, I want to go cheer on a noble lord in exchange for 12 silver coins and the honor of sitting in a strong straw for 3 days." No one chose this profession out of passion. Becoming an assassin was not a career. It was a sign that your life had hit rock bottom, had fallen into a dark place where there was still honor, a semblance of a future, and sometimes even your own will to cling to. The assassins of that time were not martial arts masters trained in ancient monasteries, nor were they figures with lofty principles of life and death. They were outcasts. Maybe a warrior who was dispossessed after a lost battle, maybe a bandit who was beaten to death for stealing bread, or worse, someone who had a family, a name, a place, until he decided to kill them all and take them deep into the great beyond. If you had a small plot of land, a skinny goat, or just a small position in the village, you would never become an assassin. No one would trade their calculating life for a few blood coins if they had anything to lose. But if you had just escaped from prison, were considered a disaster by the whole village, and had the skill to sneak into the tavern without anyone noticing, congratulations, tomorrow night you might hear a whisper and a bag of silver slide across the table. And no, the target name was never Bob the Mustard Farmer. The names were always given with a tangle of columns, a ruin ahead, a fat target sitting on a golden peak, a nobleman with 3 levels of defense and a moat full of crocodiles. You are not hired to clean up the smell. You are hired to relax, quietly and without leaving a trace. The price you pay is not just blood. It is loneliness. It is humorless fear. The truth is that you are never allowed to tell anyone what you do for a living. Especially when you are sitting in a crowded inn. You cannot say, "I am a carpet peddler," with blood still pinned to the hem of your shirt. You learn to lie, and eventually lying becomes the only thing you breathe. Your identity becomes a mask you can never take off. Many people think that being an assassin in the Middle Ages was a choice, a dark but active path, a secret profession hidden in the shadows. But no, the truth is more brutal. Being an assassin is not the beginning, it is the end. The final stop for those who have lost everything. Honor, citizenship, family, faith, and sometimes humanity. When society has driven you to the brink, when even existence becomes a hopeless resistance to fate, the assassin profession is the final role you are forced to take. Medieval assassins were not the superhuman warriors of legend or cinema. No one with black cloaks billowing in the wind, with skills honed over decades in secret temples high in the mountains. No. In reality, they were people at the bottom of society. Poor peasants who were more hungry than well-fed. Defeated soldiers left behind on the front lines with no honor or future. Petty thieves once shunned by their fellow villagers, or anonymous shadows living on the fringes of society. So much so that if they died today, no one would bother to register them in the census. None of them chose to be assassins. They simply had no other choice. This was not a profession, but a last lifeline for those who were drifting in the currents of life. They had no dreams, no goals, only a primitive survival instinct. And if someone put a bag of money on the table, even if it was only to exchange it for the blood of a powerful person, they would take it. Not because they were cruel, but because they were desperate. On the contrary, those who have money, land, and status, they never hold the knife themselves. They hire others to do it. In a world where human life is valued at a bag of silver, the rich live on the backs of the poor, and sometimes on their corpses. A man with a title, even if it is only the ownership of a goat, has the right to give orders. And a man who has been arrested has a reputation for solving problems, and can pass through a tavern without being seen. That is the target. Success in those days did not mean trustworthiness. Successful people never became assassins because people did not trade money, security, and fame for a life of running, bloodshed, and the possibility of being hanged at any moment. So, assassins only appeared when someone's life was broken, and they could only cling to cold hard money to continue breathing, even with blood on their hands. There was no training course to take in medieval assassins, no secret academy to teach the skills, no orientation or mentoring sessions from older men. No one taught you how to walk silently on stone, how to tell a real target from a double, or how to scale a wall without falling into a doghouse. If you survived your first few jobs, you were luckier than most who tried. Because in this profession, the first lesson is often the last, and the price is your life. A few assassins may have been soldiers, wielded swords in battle, knew how to hold a knife properly, knew where a single strike would be fatal. But such men were rare. Most were men who had fought in the marketplace, run from guards, or stabbed drunks in dark alleys. They learned to kill, not because they were taught to, but because they had no choice but to learn for themselves, and quickly. The best way to learn was to not die doing it, as simple, as raw, as cruel as the world they lived in. As for weapons, don't expect any shiny swords or daggers forged by renowned craftsmen. All they have is a knife stolen from a drunken soldier, a piece of rotten rope left behind a stable, or a rusty nail scavenged from a barnyard. Nothing is made for them. Everything is left over, discarded, borrowed from the deaths of others. And sometimes the thing that kills is a door lock, a stepping stone, or a bent shoe hook, if used at the right moment. Assassination, in theory, is a neat, quiet, quick, clean act. But in practice, it's a strange combination of luck, recklessness, and purposeful negligence. You do it not because you're good at it, you do it because you have to, faster than you can shake, out of sight before anyone can see you through the slits of your hat. There's no ceremony, no test, no medal. It's just you, the chipped knife, and the sound of your labored breathing in the dark. And if you live to tell, congratulations, you've passed the class no one else wants to take. Money, in the world of medieval assassins, is always an alluring flame, but also a deadly trap set in the darkness. The deal seems simple at first. Half up front, half after the job is done. A small bag of silver, enough to last a few weeks, enough to dream of a new start in a foreign land. But it's just a word. And words, in this business, are worthless when the speaker has disappeared or is silently waiting with a knife in hand. The harsh truth is that assassins often never get their money back. When the job is done, they are not greeted with a thank you or a handshake. What they face is often a stab in the back. Sometimes literally. In the eyes of their employers, assassins are no longer useful. They are a risk. The only ones who know who gave the orders, who wanted the bloodshed, and who is laughing in the dark. And nothing cleans up like a second body. Killing someone to cover up a lead is always cheaper than keeping a promise. Worse, there are contracts that are actually traps set by politicians. The assassin is hired to kill a seemingly dangerous target, but in reality it is just a decoy. A name that is not really important, well protected, and always watched by a few dozen pairs of eyes. When the blade is raised, the trap is closed. The assassin is caught in the act. Not because the action failed, but because every move was calculated in advance. They are the pawns that are sacrificed, and the price is their own life. So with each job, the assassin learns a cold lesson. Trust no one. Trust no one who hires you. Trust no promises. Trust no untouched bag of money. In this dark world, money is bait, and bait always comes with a hook. The smart one will ask for the full amount up front, check every penny, and still have an escape route ready. But even if you get the money, there is no guarantee that you will still be alive tomorrow to spend it. Because in the eyes of the world, you are not a person. You are just a problem that has been completed and needs to be cleaned up. The weapons and tools of a medieval assassin were not the flashy ones one might imagine in comics or movies. There were no ornate silver swords, no blades that popped out of their wrists, or specially crafted tools crafted in secret underground dungeons. In fact, everything they owned was makeshift, simple, and as dirty as their lives. Their weapons, if they could be called weapons, were often a rusty knife picked up from the battlefield or stolen from a drunken sentry. An old rope, a rope of some sort, perhaps a rope of some sort, or a chain of some sort, that, if wrapped properly around a man's neck, could be an instant death sentence. Sometimes it was a large iron nail, with a rough stone tip, used to stab a vital spot in the one moment when darkness and surprise were on their side. It was the art of exploitation. Anything hard enough, sharp enough, stealthy enough to escape detection could be used as a murder weapon. And since assassins can't carry around an arsenal like they do in fantasy games, they have to get creative. Weapons are often hidden in the soles of shoes, wrapped in bread, or cleverly tied under tattered cloaks, not for style, but for survival. They all have to be small, discreet, and fast enough to not be snatched away before they can strike. As for poisons, the seemingly sophisticated and magical stuff of legend, they were actually a cruel game of chance. No one taught them how to make them. There were no standard recipes, no proper dilution ratios, no hotlines or effective assassination for beginners manuals. They learned from hearsay, from experimentation, from watching others vomit blood, or... it didn't matter. Sometimes what they thought was poison just made their victims sleepy. Sometimes the assassins themselves drank the poisoned wine and died before their targets. The scariest thing was not the poor weapons, but the fact that they knew all too well. If the tools broke mid-work, there was no one to help. There were no engineers to repair them, no replacements. A chipped knife, a broken piece of string, a shaky hand while tying a knot, all of it could turn them from predator to victim. And so the only thing they could do was keep things as simple as possible, pray that their weapons wouldn't betray them, and hope that, on the next kill, the cheap tool they carried was still sharp enough not to betray them at the last minute. In medieval assassins, the targets were never the weak, the isolated, or the careless. No one paid to kill a candlemaker, an old goatherd, or a drunkard sleeping in a dark alley. The names whispered over the bars, the small pieces of paper tucked into a silver bag, always powerful men, who were guarded and never slept without triple locking their doors. It could be an autocratic lord with too much gold, a bishop too close to the political power, or a local official someone wanted to replace at any cost, as long as it was not equal. And because they were important, approaching them was a nightmare, written in stone, iron, and blood. These men did not live in thatched huts. They lived in fortresses, castles with hourly patrols, wooden stairs that creaked when stepped on incorrectly, hunting dogs trained to sniff out strangers, and hidden traps that only their closest servants knew the safe path to. Even their food was tasted in advance by servants or animals. Every step of the assassination mission was a death game. Assassins who want to get close to their targets blend into their surroundings like a shadow. They must pretend to be new servants, guards, sometimes even mendicant monks. But to do that, they must learn the name of the cook's cat, who washes his hands in the western well, who sneaks a bite of salted meat after dinner. A slip of the tongue, a misstep, even a glance too long, can be detected and paid for with a spear through the chest. And the scariest thing is, no matter how prepared, the slightest mistake, a cough, a too hard exhalation, a stone rolling underfoot, can bring it all crashing down in an instant. There is no room for spontaneity in this profession. There is no chance of doing it all over again. One move, one moment, and if it fails, the price is not the loss of a job, it is the loss of a life. No one will know you if you succeed, but everyone will know who you are if you fail. And no one will forgive a knife-wielding assassin whose hand trembles in mid-sentence. Disguise, for medieval assassins, was not the elaborate performance art of elaborate masks, tight black cloaks, or tailored suits that are so romanticized in crime movies. In fact, disguise was a quick survival game, assembled from the remains of the dead. A musty, oversized monk's robe, a bloody guard's uniform with the name of its previous owner still on it, or a tattered hat whose previous owner had probably been hastily buried by the side of the road. That was real disguise. There was no one to help you put together your outfit, no tinted glasses, and no time to look in a mirror. You wore what made you disappear into the crowd, no matter how smelly or dirty. But wearing the clothes is one thing, living in them is another. Pretending to be a gardener means knowing how to hold a hoe properly. Pretending to be a monk means reciting at least some basic mantras. Pretending to be a guard means shouting commands, standing in the right position, and not bowing too low, because real guards never do. Worse, you have to know the unfathomable details. The name of the cook's cat, the housekeeper's favorite food, the sound the door makes when someone enters or leaves the storeroom. In a heavily guarded place, any anomaly, whether it's a quick glance or a step out of sync with the guard's rhythm, is immediately noticeable. There was no safe period. Every disguise lasted only a few minutes, if you were lucky. You had no right to make mistakes. A mumbled answer, a call you didn't respond to correctly, a servant who saw you carrying the bucket wrongly, all of these could get you clubbed on the spot or dragged out into the yard and interrogated before you could do anything. And if you were discovered, there was no why. Was there a mistake or a chance to explain? There were only knives, clubs, and alarm bells ringing like farewell bells. After all, camouflage is just a one-way ticket to deeper into the enemy's lair. But it is never a real shield. You have only a few minutes to close the distance to your target. A few minutes to avoid being seen, to not let the scent of fear give you away, and to not let your trembling hand drop the knife hidden in your sleeve. After that, you either succeed and disappear before anyone notices, or you are stripped of your disguise, exposed as a dry man. In the world of medieval assassins, there is no such thing as a team or an organization, as in the romantic myths. There are no secret guilds with dagger symbols, no bases hidden deep in the mountains where trainers speak in deep voices, no brotherhoods that share missions and camaraderie. Each assassin is a lone ghost, living in a fog of suspicion, in a world where trust is the most expensive and dangerous commodity. You don't work in teams because no one trusts anyone. A good assassin never lets anyone know they exist. The fewer people who know, the longer you can survive. Talking too much, revealing too much, or simply trusting the wrong people. That's the shortest path to a quiet death behind bars, or worse, being turned over to the same people you once served. In this business, the person who hired you today may hire someone else to kill you tomorrow. Not because you betrayed, but because you knew too much. And so assassins have no friends. No one wants to be friends with someone who can kill silently and disappear into the darkness. Thieves fear you because you are more dangerous than guards. Prostitutes don't want to talk to you because your eyes never linger long enough to make them feel safe. Informers avoid you for fear that one wrong word will make them the next corpse. And if anyone does show any friendliness, it's usually a trap laid with the scent of silver or blood. Even in the rare moments when you want to talk, share, sigh, or tell a sad story, you can't. Because words are weaknesses. Emotions are cracks. And assassins are not allowed to have cracks. They have no one to confide in, no one to wait for them when they return, no one to cry if one day they disappear without a trace. Their existence is a secret. And their death must also be kept a secret. Because in this world, the more alone an assassin lives, the longer he lives. And if you see someone who is always alone, who says little, who never leaves the inn door, don't approach. They may not be an assassin. But if they are, the last you know about them is the last you know. In the cold, ruthless world of medieval assassins, failure was not simply a loss of money, a lost opportunity, or a small wound to learn from. Failure, in their language, meant death. There was no second chance. There was no forgiveness. There was no one to pull you out of your mistakes with a gentle handshake and advice. Only the blade, the rope, or the angry mob. One misstep, one slip, one moment of hesitation, and you go from hunter to prey. If you're lucky, death comes quickly, at the hands of angry guards. If you're less lucky, you'll be betrayed by the very people who hired you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you didn't do it right, or because they were afraid you'd reveal something. In many cases, the people who pay for a hitman have no intention of paying. They just want an excuse to kill the person who knows too much. And worse, when you were caught, you didn't just die. You were taken to the public square, hung on a gallows, or beheaded amid cheers and jeers. A wooden sign hung around your neck, clearly stating, "Failed assassin." No one cared how many times you had succeeded before, how skillfully and discreetly, who you had killed for whom. History doesn't remember the quiet successes. It only remembers the final failure. The one that brought you to the light, and your identity was torn apart in front of the crowd. Therefore, true assassins never allow themselves to make mistakes. They live in constant fear. Fear of strange looks, unusual footsteps, dogs barking in the distance. They live as if every moment is the boundary between continuing to exist and being erased. Because in a profession where there is no room for mistakes, a single failure is not a bad thing. Success, in the world of a medieval assassin, does not bring the rewards, glory, or freedom that one might expect. There is no banquet, no applause behind the curtain, and no small house where you can live peacefully with the money you have earned with the blood of others. When the blade pierces the heart of the person you are hired to kill, the assassin does not stand there and enjoy the moment of victory. He runs, and he will continue to run, not for a few hours, but for the rest of his life. Killing someone is like turning yourself into a secret that needs to be erased. No one wants someone who knows too much about intrigue, power, and personal grudges to be alive and ready to talk at any time. Even if the assassin does everything they promise, it is the people who hire them, the ones who stand behind the curtain, the ones who smile at banquets when the body is still cold, who are the first to want to clean up the mess. And in that game, the assassin is never a player. They are a pawn, and pawns never survive. No one carved the names of the assassins into stone. No one erected statues or wrote histories about the men who had silently killed the enemies of the kingdom. They were but passing shadows, unknown, unacknowledged. Even if their names were mentioned, it was only in threats or wanted posters posted on market corners with vague descriptions and Success doesn't make you great. It makes you dangerous. And dangerous people are always hunted. Every mission completed is a dot on the map of those who want to wipe you out. The more murders you survive, the more feared you become, not in the eyes of the people, but in the eyes of those in power. And they will not let someone like you continue. Ultimately, the success of an assassin does not open the door to a bright future. It only opens more doors, leading to thefts. In the heart of medieval society, where darkness was not only the absence of light, but also the abode of nameless fears. The image of the assassin was not limited to the role of a murderer. They were seen as evil entities, beyond the category of ordinary humans. When unable to explain why a person died suddenly in the middle of the night without leaving a trace, people began to make up stories. Not based on truth, but on distorted beliefs born of fear. The villagers whispered that the assassins were not just men. They were black magicians who could shapeshift into black dogs, the shadow of crows, or cold winds that howled in the rain at night. They believed that they could talk to ghosts, making deals with souls in exchange for the ability to be invisible at night and kill without anyone hearing their screams. No one dared touch the knife the assassin left behind, for fear it would be cursed. Not to die quickly, but to die in a fit of madness. Their ropes were seen as soul-binding devices, and their crude potions were rumored to turn people into beasts, groaning to death under the moonlight. Gradually, the killers in the dark ceased to be human. They were called eyeless men, shadows of death, or the breath of hell. And so, no one treated them as rational, emotional, fear-ridden human beings. They were seen as creatures, or rather, walking calamities, who, if not destroyed, would wreak havoc on the entire village. There was no need for a trial, no need for evidence. A strange look, a bloodstain on the sleeve, or a twisted story from the aftermarket liquor vendor was enough to start a panic. People would gather, armed with sticks, stones, and torches. They didn't care if the man had actually killed anyone. They just wanted to dispel their fear by destroying what they believed was the source of the darkness. Assassins, once discovered, did not die silently. They died amid screams, crackling wood, screaming rocks, and the glares of people who didn't necessarily hate them, but were simply too afraid to know right from wrong. And so, from being a shadowy figure, the assassin becomes the embodiment of the very fear that society cannot name. They are hunted not only for what they have done, but also for what others imagine they are capable of. In a world where reason is as fragile as tattered cloth, where twisted beliefs can smother even the truth, the death of an assassin is not unusual. It is a ritual of comfort, a way for people to suppress their own self-created panic. When most people think of assassins, they imagine mysterious vials of poison, magical liquids that, with a drop in a glass of wine, could stop a heart in an instant without leaving a trace. But the truth, like everything else in the world of medieval assassins, was far more brutal and less romantic. Poison, rather than the sophisticated tool of the learned killer, was a game of chance, a mixture of herbs and damp earth, sometimes effective, but often unsuccessful, and dangerous. There was no scientific knowledge, no laboratories, no measuring equipment. Everything they knew about poisons was passed down by word of mouth, learned from half-truthful healers, or learned from the deaths of others. Dosages were never certain. A little was harmless, too much would kill the person who ingested it. Sometimes what was thought to be poison turned out to be a digestive. Sometimes, just to knock the victim out for a few hours, the victim died convulsing in front of dozens of people, turning a secret assassination into a public declaration of war. Every use of poison was a gamble, whose outcome was never predictable. Worse, if the plan failed and was discovered, the price was not simply running away. In the superstitious and ruthless society of the time, being caught administering poison was tantamount to signing one's own death warrant. But it was not a quick death. Assassins were tortured to the extreme, not just for revenge, but to extract the name of their employer, the identities of other victims, or simply to satisfy the rage of a justice-hungry public. Sometimes they were forced to drink the poison they had administered, as a cruel joke to fate. And after all, there are no songs about them. No names in the history books. Those who die silently from poison, whether they are the ones killed or the ones who hold the vial, are swallowed up by time as if they never existed. Their bodies are thrown into ditches, burned without a name, forgotten by both their employers and their pursuers. They die silently, just as they lived, except this time there is no one to fear. And if anything remains, it is a curse passed down by word of mouth. Never touch a glass of wine when it smells strange. Finally, after all the chases in the dark, the disguises, the bloodstains no one dares to mention, and the faces only seen in the last moments of life, the medieval assassin ends his journey in absolute silence. No legacy, No name, nothing left for posterity but a series of fragmented memories and fear in his heart. No one knows your name. Your employers never want to know, and if they do, they forget it as soon as the job is done. The people you kill never live to speak your name. And you never dare to name yourself. Because that would be like painting a target on your forehead. Your name, if you ever had one, is swallowed up in dank walls, dark alleys, and moonless nights. When you die, there will be no one to cry for, no one to remember. No one will carve a tombstone for you. No grave left behind, no plot of land where your body will rest. The assassin dies in silence, and the body, if not burned or thrown into a well, is buried in a shallow pit with no name, no flowers, no visitors. Not because you don't deserve to be remembered, but because no one dares. They are afraid that your name will be mentioned. Even the clients who hired you, the ones who should be grateful, are the first to want you gone, because you are a living secret. You are an unerased trace. And in the game of power, there is nothing more dangerous than a walking past. So once the job is done, you are not celebrated. You become a necessity. And that is the bitterest part. The only mark you leave in this world is your disappearance. No farewell song. No enemy to honor for defeating you. No posterity to tell the story of how you lived, fought, and killed unseen. You came as a shadow, and you struck. In the shadowed world of medieval assassins, the concept of retirement was a cruel fantasy, something whispered among fools who hadn't yet killed, or among those too weary to accept the truth. For a killer of the shadows, there was no final mission that bought peace, no last job that earned freedom. The end was never a quiet home in the woods, but a knife in the dark or a noose in the square. No one simply stopped. No one just walked away. From the moment the first life was taken, the assassin became a marked soul, destined to live not forward, but sideways, slipping between cracks and cities, never staying long enough for a name to stick. Every alias was a mask hastily sewn, every bed a trap, every town a ticking clock. You slept with a knife beneath your pillow, not out of bravado, but because the sound of a footstep outside your door at midnight might not be imagined. It might be someone like you, but faster, younger, hired by the same kind of man who once hired you. Trust in that life wasn't a virtue. It was a liability. The merchant offering you work might be bait. The barmaid smiling too warmly might recognize your face. The boy offering water might run to tell a guard. Even your own thoughts, your instincts began to betray you, because paranoia wasn't a sickness in your trade. It was the only thing that kept you breathing. And worst of all, every move you made carried weight. A step too loud, a glance too long, a moment of hesitation. In a profession where death was business, even blinking at the wrong time could be your final act. You became the hunted, not because of failure, but because you were once too good, because you were too quiet, because too many people needed to erase you to sleep soundly at night. So no, there was no retirement for the assassin. No golden sunset, no last drink, no farewell. There was only silence, footsteps behind you, and a life measured not in years, but in breaths taken while still unseen. And now, when you have quieted your mind, when all the noise of reality has receded behind like waves crashing on an old sandbank, let me continue to take you on another journey together, leaving the modern world, full of electric lights, Wi-Fi and air conditioning, to turn back the clock thousands of years, back to the distant banks of the Nile, where an ancient civilization once stood in the middle of the desert with giant pyramids, powerful pharaohs and gods, who silently observed your every breath, every smallest action. But don't let the glittering gold masks and magnificent temples fool you. Behind that halo is a harsher reality than any film has ever recorded. A world where the heat not only makes you sweat, but can cook you in the thin linen shirt you are wearing. So ask yourself, what would happen if you lived just one day, yes, just one day, in ancient Egypt? I can tell you one thing. The sun won't be the only one trying to burn you. If you can, turn on a fan to create some soothing background noise, like the Nile whispering through a reed roof. And we'll continue our journey tonight to ancient Egypt, a land of pyramids reaching to the sky, gods with animal heads, and a light, not a divine light, but an ultraviolet light, that is always ready to shine straight at you like a warning from the universe. When the first rays of the day hit the land of ancient Egypt, it was not the gentleness of dawn, but a fierce heat, as if someone had pulled the sun closer to the ground. In a world without curtains, without air conditioning, and without shade, mornings here began not with an alarm clock, but with a sweltering heat that woke people up in sweat and fatigue. Ordinary people lived in simple thatched huts, with straw mats spread directly on the dry ground. No beds, no soft pillows, no other comforts to protect against the elements. Even in the early hours of the day, the heat was enough to make the air heavy, like an invisible blanket covering everything. It was a slow, relentless harshness, not loud, not sudden, but persistent and unforgiving. They had no sunscreen, no sunglasses, no wide-brimmed hats to shield their skin from the scorching sun. And there was no choice but to continue working, in the sun, on the sand, in the hot wind. In such circumstances, the ancient Egyptians turned to the most instinctive and primitive, protective means. They smeared mud on their skin, creating a natural film that could help cool and prevent the skin from burning. Some even used crocodile dung, a strange material that today makes people shudder, but in that era it was believed to have sun protection, repelling insects, or even sacred. Were these measures really effective? Perhaps not by modern standards. But what was more important was the will and effort of humans to adapt. In an environment where nature seemed to have only one purpose, to test endurance, the Egyptians still found a way, no matter how primitive, no matter how strange, to continue to survive. It was not just an act of resistance to the weather, but a profound expression of resilience. Humans, small and fragile as they were, always found a way to survive. From the first grain of sand in the desert to the first scorching rays of the morning sun. In the life of the ancient Egyptians, the Nile was more than just a stream. It was the soul of civilization. Everything revolved around it, from agriculture to trade to daily life. But behind that poetic name lies a thorny truth. The Nile is an essential source of life, but also a harsh challenge that Egyptians face every day, every hour. The river water, which seems sacred and pure, is in fact often murky, foul-smelling, and full of hidden dangers. It is home to a series of dangerous creatures, from ferocious crocodiles that can suddenly rush ashore to parasites that lurk in the mud. But because there is no clean water supply system or water filtration technology, people are forced to use the water itself for all their needs, from drinking, cooking, to bathing. They do not have scented soap, shampoo, or shower gel. Instead, they use coarse sand to rub on their skin, both to exfoliate and as a rustic and only way to clean themselves. Washing clothes by the riverbank seems like a simple task, but it is fraught with great danger. Just one slip or an accidental splash can attract the attention of crocodiles, silent predators that always lurk in the murky water. In their eyes, the movements of the washer's limbs are no different from the struggling prey. And there have been many cases where people, especially women and children, have become victims just because of a daily wash. Bathing, a basic human need, is not easy either. Without private bathrooms, Egyptians have to bathe outdoors, in public areas by the river where everyone can see and where flies and mosquitoes swarm, carrying dangerous pathogens. Privacy is almost non-existent, and safety is not guaranteed. Bathing, therefore, is not an act of relaxation, but a test of agility, vigilance, and sometimes courage. And so, the Nile, both a mother who nourishes an entire nation and demands constant vigilance from her children. Its waters bring silt to the fields, fish for food, but also bring disease, danger, and countless uncertainties. But the ancient Egyptians did not blame the river. They did not avoid it. They learned to live with it, endure it, and adapt. It is in this paradoxical relationship that we see the resilience of humans, qualities that help them build one of the world's greatest civilizations, right on the edge between life and danger. When a new day began in the fiery land of ancient Egypt, the people here did not wake up to a hearty, fragrant, or nutritious breakfast. Instead, they started their tiring day of work with a simple and austere meal, a slice of dry bread and a cup of strong beer, which was both food and a makeshift solution to survive in harsh conditions. Bread, a seemingly simple and familiar dish, but in ancient Egypt, it carried the flavor of endurance. Made from wheat ground in stone mills, the bread here often contained fine sand, tiny rock dust that accidentally stuck to the flour when grinding, but there was no way to remove it. Over the years, those grains of sand not only made the food dry and difficult to swallow, but also contributed to the wear of the eater's teeth, leaving clear traces on the remains that archaeologists can still see today. However, it was still the main dish, simply because it was all they had. Along with the bread was a thick, cloudy, and smelly beer, completely different from the modern image of a cool, aromatic drink. This beer was not for enjoyment, but for survival. In the context of the Nile water, filled with pathogens and dangerous impurities, naturally fermented beer from grain became one of the less risky options for sustaining life. Not only did it provide quick energy from carbohydrates, but it was also considered the most rustic form of clean water. Not very easy to drink, but at least safer than drinking raw water from the river. On lucky days, that breakfast could be improved a little by an onion or a few dates. A rare sweetness between the bland and astringent taste of the poor meal. These foods were not only a meager source of vitamins, but also a small joy in everyday life. A change of taste, a brief moment of comfort before plunging into hard work under the scorching sun. And so, the ancient Egyptian breakfast, simple and lacking in nutrition, contained a world of endurance and adaptability. From the loaf of bread with sand to the mug of cloudy fermented beer, each dish was not just for filling, but for living, to survive in harshness, to continue to cultivate a magnificent civilization from the simplest and most ascetic things. That breakfast, though not sumptuous, was the truest testimony to the simple yet resilient lives of the people who built the pyramids in the middle of the blazing desert. In ancient Egypt, life did not take place under the splendor of the pyramids, or in the golden corridors of the palace as people often imagine. For the majority of the population, those not of noble blood, their lives were tied to hard, brutal labor with no escape. They were not figures carved into the cliffs, but hands that actually touched every stone, every field, every blade of dry grass, in exchange for survival in a harsh society. If they were men and not members of the powerful or dignitary class, their fate was almost predetermined: farming, hauling stones, or participating in tomb building. 3 jobs that required great physical strength but offered little protection and almost no reward. Farming under the fierce desert sun meant hunching from dawn to dusk, holding crude scythes, steering old wooden plows pulled by oxen or men. The tools were simple, crude, and so inefficient that each harvest was paid for with salty sweat and sometimes blood. Being chosen to be a tomb builder, one of the jobs that seems closer to the gods, means risking your life every day. The huge blocks of stone can collapse at any moment. A slip, a small mistake during transportation is enough to leave a person lying forever in the tomb they are building. Worse, many people also carry an invisible obsession, the fear of being cursed, for violating the sacred resting place of the pharaohs. In the minds of the ancients, death did not only come from accidents, but could also come from the anger of the gods, of restless souls. For women, things were no easier. Even though they were not hauling stones or building tombs, they were still the ones who worked almost without a minute of rest. During the day, they went to the fields, hoeing, weeding, harvesting rice. At night, they returned to do laundry, cook, take care of children, and repair the house. There was no clear division between housework and fieldwork, because all were responsibilities, and all weighed heavily on their shoulders. In that society, women had no voice, but they were still the ones who kept the wheels of life moving, silently, tiredly, and with quiet sacrifice. All of that reflected a thorny but profound reality, that behind the longevity of a great civilization were layers upon layers of people who endured and worked tirelessly. Their names were not recorded in history books, nor were they carved on stone tablets, but their traces existed in every brick, every rice field, every sleepless night. Their lives may have been small, but their resilience, the way they worked, endured, and survived, was the true foundation that supported the Nile dynasty that lasted for thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, life was not just a story of hot sun, of labor, or of simple meals. Hidden deep within those seemingly ordinary things is a complex, tight-knit, and fascinating social system where power, religion, and human destiny were interwoven like invisible threads into a vast ancient tapestry called destiny. At the pinnacle of that system was the pharaoh, not just a king, The pharaoh was not seen as a mere mortal, but as the living embodiment of Horus on earth, the son of the sun god Ra, the custodian of Maat, the divine principle of order, reason, and harmony in the universe. And when a ruler was seen as a god, any criticism, any sigh about the hardships of life could be seen as an act against the gods, as blasphemy, as rebellion. To complain about the work of the fields or the famine of the drought was not only an insult to the ruler, but also a breach of the sacred fabric of the world. And in a culture where any disturbance could cause a catastrophe, flood, famine, plague, silence, obedience, and faith were almost mandatory. Ordinarily, the pharaoh was never seen by ordinary people. His image was carved on temple walls, on stone statues, on sacred objects many times his size, an artistic convention that signaled that the pharaoh was not of the human realm. On rare occasions, the people might see a golden barge carrying his sacred image gliding down the Nile in a grand procession. But that was all. The pharaoh existed as a living myth, an unreachable, unquestioned, and therefore unjudged ultimate symbol. While divine power reigned above, beneath your feet, there was a silent, ever-present force, the sand. Sand was not just something that stretched across the desert, it was an unwelcome companion, an intruder in every moment of life. It crawls into your clothes, into your bedding, clings to your sweaty skin, and hides in every corner of your kitchen, in every bite of bread you eat every morning. The flour is ground with stones, and each time you grind it, a little bit of the stone gets mixed in, creating a dish that, over time, grinds your teeth until they're as smooth as stream pebbles. But the sand isn't the worst part. Sometimes sandstorms come out of nowhere, like punishment from the gods. One second you're talking to someone, the next a hot blast of wind blasts dust into your face, burning your skin, stinging your eyes, turning the world into a blurry dance of shadows and coughs. Sand gets into your lungs, making breathing a struggle. You rub your eyes, cough up the dust, and wonder what you did to deserve it. But in Egypt, no one asks questions, because the answer is always, the gods have their reasons. And yes, in this society, religion is not a part of life. It is life. There is not a single action, no matter how small, that is not governed by faith. You cannot eat without first offering a small portion to the gods. You cannot go to sleep without praying, so that your soul is not dragged down by wandering spirits. You rise early to thank Ra for bringing back the sun. You work to maintain Maat, the order of the world. You live in the knowledge that every act, every word, even every thought will be weighed in an eternal trial after you die. Death, in another society, might be the end. But in ancient Egypt, it was only the first part of a long journey through the afterlife. There, your heart is weighed against a feather, a symbol of truth and justice. If your heart is heavier, that is filled with lies, malice, betrayal, you will be swallowed by a horrifying creature. The head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, the legs of a hippopotamus. There is no hell, no punishment, just obliteration. Your soul is erased from the universe as if you had never existed. But if you make it, you will reach the field of reeds, an eternal paradise where you farm without tiring, eat without hunger, where the sun is as gentle as a psalm, where the gods are no longer guardians but companions. And to get there, you must live fully in faith, in law, in the balance between duty and faith. Every day, every hour, every action. That is ancient Egypt, where power is divine, where sand is fate, where faith is the thread that binds life and death in an endless circle of order and chaos. A society that seems harsh, but operates on dignity, sacred fear, and a strange belief that if you live right, you will be immortal. In ancient Egypt, life and death were not as clearly separated as we think. Between those two markers lies a gray area where wounds are treated with magic, where unseen spirits can cause stomach aches, and where an amulet can carry as much weight as a diagnosis. Medicine here is a strange blend of observational knowledge and spiritual belief. The healer is someone who can both drain abscesses with a copper blade and whisper incantations to ward off the malevolent spirits that inhabit the spleen. Medicines are a mixture of the rational and the irrational. Honey, which actually has antibacterial properties, mixed with mold, the original source of penicillin, and sometimes animal dung or lizard blood. Because the ancients believed that the strangest things are often the most powerful. And if you have to undergo minor surgery, forget about anesthesia. There are no anesthetics, no breathing tubes, no heart monitors. With only a sharp knife and a friend to hold you down by the shoulders as you grit your teeth and groan on a mud brick, all under the auspices of the healing gods. In every ritual, from childbirth to healing, from banishing evil spirits to sewing up cuts, amulets are worn as spiritual armor. No one believes that the body can heal if the soul remains threatened. So a carved piece of stone, a sacred tattoo, or a spell tied around the neck was not just jewelry, but the most comprehensive protection an ordinary Egyptian could possess. In this dangerous world, Egyptian women walked as silent pillars of society. Unlike many other ancient civilizations, women here had rights that might surprise modern people. They could own land, sign contracts, divorce their husbands, and even sue a man in court. On paper, that sounded progressive. But the reality was much harsher, because rights did not mean freedom from labor or pain. A woman often rose before dawn, ground grain by hand, carried water from the Nile, cooked, tended children, fed livestock, and sometimes helped her husband in the fields, all while pregnant. When it was time to give birth, a sacred but dangerous moment, there was no hospital bed, no doctor, no painkillers, no sterile delivery room. She gave birth on the hot ground, with incense, prayers, and a faint hope that her body would be strong enough to survive the moment. And even when the birth was safe, there was no rest. Before the baby had stopped crying, the mother's hands were pounding grain, weaving, swatting away flies, wiping sweat with the hem of her shirt. It was a daily reality, not captured in murals or sculptures, but the steady pulse that kept this society alive. Only women of the aristocracy, the daughters of officials or pharaohs, had the opportunity to enter the other world, where they learned to read and write, could manage property, even wield power. Some of them became priestesses, temple wardens, or, in the rarest of cases, pharaohs, like Hatshepsut, who ruled with power and wisdom equal to that of any male king. But for the vast majority of Egyptian women, status was just a line in the law. Real life, a line in the dirt, in cracked pots, and in the sighs of the night when she lay down beside her infant, her hands still smelling of onions and sweat. So, in a world where illness could be attributed to demons, and mothers had to work even while in labor, we have a society full of contradictions, strong but fragile, reverent of the gods but constantly struggling with reality. This was ancient Egypt, a place where human endurance was tested every day, every hour, and where women, despite being granted rights, had to live as silent warriors in the harsh desert of life. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a gateway to a new journey. Longer, more mysterious, and requiring more preparation than life on earth. They did not view death as something to be feared, but as a sacred transitional state where the soul had to pass a series of tests to enter paradise, the field of reeds, a glorious and peaceful land where the harvests were always bountiful, the rivers flowed peacefully, and people lived in eternal happiness. Because of this strong belief, the Egyptians spent their whole lives preparing for death. Those who could afford it would build tombs very early, collecting burial objects such as guardian statues, jewelry, dried foods, perfumes, and even dolls called ushapti, small figures made of stone, wood, or faience, believed to work on behalf of the deceased in the afterlife. In the ancient world, where death was not the end but part of the eternal journey, tombs were built with absolute solemnity, containing precious burial objects, from gold and silver, spices to statues of gods and sacred books that guided the soul in the afterlife. But that very value also turned these resting places into attractive targets for greed. Not only the tombs of powerful pharaohs, but also the simple tombs of ordinary people became victims. Terrifying curses were carved into the stone walls to frighten off trespassers. Words that the thief's soul would be devoured by a snake, his limbs cursed for all eternity. But in the end, faith could not stop hunger. The cruel reality was that curses often did not work, or at least not enough to stop people. In many cases, it was those entrusted with sacred duties, such as priests or tomb builders, who turned their backs on the sacred to steal the very things they once revered. And worse, it was not just greed, but often survival. When the stomach was growling, when the harvest was failing and the family was starving, a jar of perfume, a piece of linen, or even a loaf of bread left at the graveside became a gift of fate. Tomb robbing, for all its horror and outrage, is sometimes just a whisper of human despair in the struggle between faith and survival. In ancient Egypt, knowledge was more than power, it was magic. And no symbol expressed that more clearly than the elaborate hieroglyphic system the Egyptians left behind. Carved into temple walls, etched into coffins, drawn on papyrus, these symbols were not mere writing, but a bridge between man and the divine, between the physical world and the spirit world. But the system was not for the masses. Reading and writing were considered special sacred skills, a privilege reserved for a few, rigorously trained from childhood. The scribes and scribes. These people did not drag stones or plow fields in the sun, but sat in the shade, recording books, laws, prayers, and the names of both the living and the dead. And that's where the real power lies. For in Egyptian belief, a person's name was the part of their soul that was tied to their eternal existence. Writing someone's name was like giving them immortality. Conversely, to erase someone's name was not simply to erase their identity. It was to erase them from the universe, to erase their soul forever. In a culture that revered immortality, that was more terrifying than death. So, in a society where the majority of the population was illiterate, the scribes were not just officials, they were keepers of memories and fate, witnesses to the gods and the mortals, people with the power to save or destroy a soul with nothing but ink and bamboo. Life in ancient Egypt was not the romantic picture that movies often paint. If you tried to live even one day in that world, you would probably quickly realize that you were not born to endure it. Before the sun had even risen high, the heat was scorching, sand seeped into every corner, and breakfast was a loaf of sand-mixed bread and a thick mug of beer. Not for enjoyment, but for survival. There were no antibiotics, no air conditioning, no sunscreen, and certainly no time to relax. Every hour is a struggle against the heat, against physical labor, against illness, and against the strict rules of the gods. For a modern person accustomed to convenience, you would collapse after only a few hours, if not from exhaustion, then from culture shock. Yet strangely, the ancient Egyptians did not despair. Despite living in harsh conditions, they still maintained a strong belief in the gods, still loved their families, still sang, painted, and dreamed of the afterlife as an indispensable part of life. It was a spiritual strength that transcended reality, something that, perhaps, we today lack. And just when you think the story is over, the video opens to another scene, thousands of kilometers away, in a completely different world. Teotihuacan, the majestic stone city in the heart of ancient America. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was more than a religious monument. It was a theater of power, a stone map of the cosmos, and a testament to bloody sacrifice. More than 200 people were sacrificed, bones were buried in sacred geometry, and the mercury-filled underground tunnels reflect the haunting notions of death and rebirth. No one knows why Teotihuacan collapsed, but it is precisely the absence of explanation that makes it so hauntingly mysterious. Like Egypt, where men built monuments that stood the test of time, Teotihuacan is a symbol of the desire to reach the divine, even if the price is blood, tears, or destruction. Ultimately, both civilizations teach us an undeniable truth. Greatness always comes with a shadow. What's carved in stone is not just glory, but also a warning that when men try to reach the gods, they sometimes reach their own depths. So we've lived a day in ancient Egypt, and if you're still here, you survived, in spirit. Physically, probably not, because the reality is no air conditioning, no shoes, no clean water, no Advil, just the sun, sand, flies, and a pile of gritty bread. A world where you are sunburned in the morning, exhausted by day, and forced to face a divine test after death, just to hope for a field of reeds. But the strange thing is, despite all this hardship, the ancient Egyptians did not despair. They still loved, still believed, still built eternal things. And perhaps that is why, thousands of years later, we still talk about them. And then just when you think you have reached the end of your journey, another door opens. Teotihuacan. A civilization that left no name, no greeting, only giant stone temples, human blood, and stone snakes staring back at you. It is not just ruins, it is an unanswered question. Greatness is buried in silence. So if you find this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe, so that each time we continue another strange journey. And you, how long do you think you could survive in ancient Egypt? Leave a comment below. And now, good night, if you dare. And before your dreams take you too far, let me take you on a journey back in time. A journey through the night into a world as noisy, stifling, and smoky as the straw-rotten walls that shiver in the first cold wind of the season. It is the medieval tavern, a place that is never found on maps, but is the silent heart of every town, the unofficial news hub, and the only stage where an armored knight, a muddy peasant, and a wandering poet can drink themselves to a pulp, squabble, and get their pockets picked without anyone noticing. It is more than a place to drink. It is a boiling pot of strange mixtures of danger, laughter, smells, and sometimes disease, all bubbling under a thatched roof that seems to have been kept together only by magic. You're walking slowly down a muddy street where the pavement smells like a strange mixture of horse manure, wood smoke, and the fumes of a soup pot simmering in the corner of the market. Of course, it's raining or has just stopped, so everything is wet and slippery, even your only shoes, which are now as heavy as stone and as cold as mud. You're exhausted, your stomach is empty, and your spirit is broken after nearly being run over by a cart full of turnips. Not once, but twice. You need a place to stop, a drink, some warmth, somewhere that doesn't mind that you're soaked, dirty, and stinking. So how are you supposed to find a pub in a medieval town where even the signs are hard to read, let alone online reviews or GPS? The answer isn't in your eyes, it's in your ears. You just listen and follow the noise. A medieval tavern was not simply a place to drink. It was a place to live, to forget, to remember, to become someone or no one. It was like an open chest, breathing in people and breathing out stories. You did not enter a tavern, you entered the pulsing pulse of a community, where laughter, swearing, clinking glasses, and the weary sighs of those who had gone too far in life all mingled together. The air inside was thick as a soup of all the things no one dared to name. Kitchen smoke, sweat, damp wool, stale beer, charred meat, and a touch of dreams that had not yet grown. Each visitor brought with him a piece of the outside world. Mud on the hem of his shirt, a suspicious look, a wound on his hand, an untold story. And the tavern refuses no one. It welcomes everyone, like a silent mother with calloused hands who has never refused any of her children, no matter in what form they return. Everything in the tavern is primitive, but not meaningless. The ceiling is so low that it forces you to crouch like a humble ritual before entering the world of others. The straw-lined ground cannot hide the smell of time, but it warms the footsteps of the weary traveler. The tables and chairs are crooked and old, but they are witnesses to hundreds of evenings where people have cried, sung, loved, fought, and forgiven. There is no privacy, but in this very close and messy space, people are closer to each other, more exposed, because here, no one has anything to hide. And in the midst of all that liveliness, there is always one person who keeps the rhythm, the innkeeper. They do not have thrones, but they are the ones who truly run this small kingdom. No one knows exactly where they come from, only that they have been here longer than the wooden beams on the roof. They are the ones who know when to pour another drink, and when to take the cup back from the hand of someone who has had too much to drink. They can be a friend in the afternoon, a judge at dusk, and a guard at midnight. Men are often gruff, but their eyes are a storehouse of memories from the coldest winters and the longest summer nights. Women are the ones who can silence a room with a glance, not out of fear, but out of respect. They know who is lying, who is running away, who is in love and dares not speak. They do not need paper or pen. Their memory is a living map of every person who has ever passed through their doors. In an age without social media, without newspapers, without a place to vent, the pub is the network of human emotions. There, information is passed around like glasses of beer, a little distorted but still enough to connect. There, strangers become friends after a few drinks, and sometimes enemies because of a bad roll of the dice. But no matter what happens, the tavern keeper is the one who works miracles. Keeps things from collapsing, keeps the party going, keeps the fire in the hearth and in the hearth never completely extinguished. A medieval tavern is a place where people return to their most naked nature. Weak, conflicted, longing to be understood, to be heard, to be drunk. And in the midst of that world, smoky, noisy, rough, we realize a simple but profound truth. Sometimes, in the most seemingly chaotic places, people find belonging. Not because it is perfect, but because it accepts us, just as we are. In a medieval tavern, ordering a drink is like rolling the dice with fate. Sometimes you get a sip that warms your heart, sometimes it tests your stomach, and if you are unlucky, your life. A drink in a pub isn't something to be sipped for pleasure, it's something to help you escape the winter chill, forget about the day's toil, or strike up a conversation with a stranger. But whatever the purpose, one thing's for sure, you won't have much choice, and any choice comes with a bit of risk. The most common is ale, a cloudy beer, thick, warm, brewed on sun-filtered, unpasteurized, without any of the processes you'd expect from a modern brewery. A pint of ale back then might carry barley lees, floating foam, and if you were lucky, a mysterious hair or other unidentifiable trace. There was no refrigeration, no preservation. You just closed your eyes and hoped it wasn't the one from last week. If you were feeling more adventurous, you could try mead. The name sounds poetic, and on rare occasions the taste was as sweet as the psalm. But sometimes it was so astringent that you'd feel like you'd just drunk real bee venom. It was usually reserved for the wealthy, or for special occasions, or simply when the barkeep was in a good mood. Another option was cider, often served in cracked ceramic cups. Its taste was as erratic as the weather in March. One day it was refreshingly sour, the next like vinegar mixed with spring water. But it was still preferred to plain water, because, strictly speaking, clean water was a luxury. Wells were rarely well protected. River water was teeming with bacteria, and boiling it took wood, something no one wanted to waste. So even children drank watered-down ale, not for pleasure, but to survive. And wine, yes, but only if you were a noble, a high priest, or lucky enough to be in a region with good trade. Even so, most of the wine available to commoners was watered down to the point of being a slightly sour water, served with a sneer from the poorer. So if you're holding a glass of rich oaky red, congratulations, you're not in the Middle Ages. After a few drinks and a growling stomach, you'll know it's time to eat, but don't expect a menu, let alone a waiter. Here you go up to the counter, ask a simple question. Is there anything else? And then say a silent prayer. A pub dinner is a gamble, and the most popular dish is pottage, a thick stew, cooked in a large pot that is never cleaned and never thrown away. For Monday, it starts with a few handfuls of grain, a few vegetables, and each day you add whatever's available. Roots, leaves, bird heads, rabbit feet, bits of meat of unknown origin. The only thing that never happens to a pottage is getting worse. It just gets thicker, richer, darker, and more complex over time. If you're lucky, there might be meat, but don't ask what kind. It could be rabbit, sparrow, stray chicken, or some creature that no one dares to name. And to eat, you have to have your own utensils. Everyone carries a knife, not just for eating, but sometimes to threaten someone who takes the wrong chair. Spoons are rare, so most people use their hands. Some fastidious people carry their own wooden bowls, like sacred rugs in the desert, to avoid sharing a bowl that has held many things. Bread and cheese are also available, but don't expect steaming soft loaves or melted camembert. The bread here is so hard it could be nailed to, and the cheese smells like a month of lingering in a cloth bag. If you're lucky, you might get to try the special of the day. Essentially the leftovers from the previous week, reheated and given a poetic name like chefs. And strangely, for all the crudeness, the unfamiliar flavors, and the possibility of a stomachache, these meals still feel warm. Not because they're delicious, but because they're hot, because you're sharing them with someone else. And because for that moment, by the crackling fire, you're no longer a stranger. You are part of the tavern, part of the night, part of the stories that will continue to be told tomorrow through the smell of pottage that has not yet cooled. Entering a medieval tavern, you are not only lost in a bustling space, but also lost in a sea of people. Each face is a story. Each eye is an untold mystery. This is not just a place to eat, to drink, but a place where social classes coexist, mingle, collide, and sometimes laugh together. A peasant with calloused hands can sit next to a merchant counting his wallet. A monk hidden in a shabby cloak can listen to gossip from a mercenary just returned from the battlefield. And somewhere, a strange traveler is making notes in a notebook in a script that no one in the tavern can read. Everyone who comes here brings something, a story, a lie, a pain, or a song. You might hear a blushing peasant recounting the story of a cow giving birth in the wrong place, which he believed was a good omen, while a soldier, his armor scuffed and his breath heavy with alcohol, boiled out a story of an unheard of battle, where he fought 3 dragons and a talking sword. No one believed him, but everyone listened, because here, the truth was less important than how you told it. There was no shortage of suspicious strangers. A monk with his head down, avoiding the light. No one knew if he was a repentant pilgrim or a bandit on the run. But the tavern didn't ask. It just watched. And the best observers of all were the women in the tavern. They weren't just waiters or regulars. They knew who was telling the truth, who was about to start a fight, who was trying to hide. They walked as softly as cats, but their eyes were sharp enough to stop a drunk in mid-sentence. Children are present too, running past the adults, sneaking up on leftovers, listening to their conversations with the curious eyes and ears of their unnamed little worlds. In this chaos, it is the smallest who see everything. And then, when the sound in the bar erupts like a directionless storm, you suddenly realize, this is the symphony of life. The clinking of glasses is everywhere, sometimes in celebration, sometimes by accident, but always accompanied by cheers. Broken glasses can be an accident, or the beginning of an argument, and in both cases all become part of the collective act. Loud laughter, crosstalk, someone hissing an unfinished story, swearing as a backbeat for gossip. Then there's the sound of a guitar, or something close to a guitar, from a busker struggling to find a tune between slack strings and a dry throat. He's wearing pants, that's more than last night. And then suddenly, someone drops, a fart so powerful that the room holds its breath for a full 3 seconds before exploding in a fit of laughter. It's a moment no one teaches, but everyone understands. This is where every sound, good or bad, has its place. And when the alcohol reaches its peak, the game begins. There's no dealer, no moderator, just a few coins, a crumpled piece of cloth, and a pile of wooden or bone dice tossed onto the table. Bets start with a few coins, a few glasses of wine, and gradually escalate to a pair of boots, a knife, even a real goat tied outside the door. The rules change depending on who explains, and the drunker you are, the more flexible the rules become. A deck with missing cards is enough, as long as you don't ask too many questions. Cheating is not the exception, it's the style. A smaller than usual die slipped down your sleeve, a card secretly marked with a fingernail, a well-timed cough that makes your neighbor change his mind. It's all part of the "I never cheated" act. But be careful. Laugh it off, but if you expose the wrong person, you could end up with a beer in your face or a chair in your back. In addition to gambling, there are nameless dares. Who can drink the most without spilling? Who can balance the longest on a 3-legged stool? Who can arm wrestle the barkeep? There are games of fire, games of holding back laughter, games for no other reason than to attract attention. But what they all have in common is that they are all born from the same thing. People want to have fun, want to try, want to laugh out loud without any reason. Because in the cold and harsh world out there, where tomorrow can bring hunger, disease, war, a night in a tavern, with sounds, games, stories, and a little madness, becomes the most precious luxury. A night of living, as if nothing is scary. A night to be yourself, or someone else. A night, enough to forget, enough to remember. In a world where every day is a struggle for survival, with harsh weather, rules that change according to the mood of the ruler, and a slight fever that can be a death sentence. A shabby tavern with rotten straw, rickety tables, and a flickering fire becomes a small paradise for tired souls. Not because the place was clean, not because the drinks were good, but because it allowed people to be themselves, or forget who they were, just for a night. Here, laughter needed no reason. A street singer could sing songs that no one believed were true, and no one asked for proof. A stranger told a story about fighting a bear, seeing a witch, or claiming to be Charlemagne's grandson, and was applauded like a stage star. Tavern stories didn't need to be true, just good. Because sometimes people weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a sense of connection, of being heard, of sitting together in a world divided by class and violence. In the dim light of the oil lamp, love and compassion found a home. Whether it was just a look, a refilled glass of wine, or a silly line of poetry accompanied by a pat of bread on the forehead. They were all attempts, clumsy but sincere, to touch each other's hearts. And the women, from the waitress to the prostitute, were not weak. They saw through the game, chose their invitations, and knew how to survive in a world that didn't encourage trust. They don't wait to be saved. They write their own stories, one drink at a time, one glance at a time. When tempers flare and chairs fly across the table, a fight in a tavern isn't unusual. It's part of the ritual. A fight isn't about killing, it's about venting anger, asserting yourself, and then clinking glasses together in laughter, as if violence were just a way to make new friends. Perhaps that's why grudges here rarely last. Instead, people leave with a new nickname, a bruise to tell, and a story to tell the next time they get drunk. And when night falls, sleeping in a tavern, on straw with dogs under the table, is safer than any castle. No locks, no guards, just snoring, farting, crackling wood, and a shared breathing rhythm. Slow, heavy, but with a sense of presence. That you are not alone. That no matter how scary the world outside is, in this cramped room, you are still part of something bigger. And perhaps that is the deepest meaning of a medieval tavern. It is not just a place to drink, but a place for people to regain a bit of their humanity that has been torn apart by life. A place where knights, peasants, monks, and thieves can all sit together. Not because they are the same, but because they all need a place to breathe, to tell, to dream, and sometimes to forget. And in today's world, when we are also tired of too much information, too many standards, too little truth, and too much loneliness, perhaps we are still looking for such a tavern, not necessarily with beer, but certainly with a place for imperfect people to be present without being judged. A place to laugh, to fight with words, to tell a lie that everyone wants to hear. A place, even if it exists only in the imagination, where people can be people. Whole, shabby, and alive. Every morning after a long night in a medieval tavern, people do not wake up to the soft music or the aroma of coffee, but with the sound of wooden spoons hitting empty buckets, long dry yawns, and the strong smell of porridge that had boiled since last night. There was no menu, no choice. Just bread reheated until it was softer than ice, a little beer diluted to the point of no yeast, and a few spoonfuls of pottage that was thick, like a sadness that had not yet been quenched. Yet, for those who had just survived a chaotic night, it was a feast of survival. You opened your eyes, your neck still aching, your back still sore. You couldn't quite remember how you ended up lying next to a stranger and a one-eyed dog. But you were breathing. That was enough. And then, like every morning in this harsh world, the tavern begins its familiar life cycle. The sound of footsteps dragging across the damp straw floor, the whispering of people recounting the events of the previous night. Each time, adding a little more color, a little more fiction. And then laughter breaks out, crisp, as if they themselves can't believe they're still alive. The world outside hasn't changed. Still hungry, still cold, still full of incomprehensible laws. But inside these rotten wooden walls and tilted thatched roofs, the tavern continues to exist like a small buoy in the harsh sea of life, where people come not just to drink, but to exist together. It was not a place to forget reality, but a place to face it, with laughter, with stories, with a clink of glasses, with the person with whom you had fought the night before. Because in that age where everything could be taken away, land, honor, life, there was one thing that no one could take away from a person: the ability to tell stories, to listen to each other, to be present. And the tavern, in its crudest but truest way, was the sanctuary of that. Not the church, not the castle, not the market, but the tavern where the most broken lives found the warmth of community. A soldier who had lost his comrade, a failed thief, a mother who had lost her child, a penniless merchant, all could sit together without having to explain anything. No one asked who you were, what you did, where you came from. Just sitting down, pouring a drink, and listening or telling a story, true or false, was enough to make you feel accepted. And if you ever wondered why, in folk memory, the tavern is always mentioned as a special place, it is probably not because it is fun, but because it is the only place where people of all classes can sit at the same table. It does not erase the class gap, but it blurs it, enough so that in the moment of clinking glasses, everyone is human, with the desire to live, to love, to tell, and to remember. In the end, the tavern is the beating heart of medieval society. Rough, irregular, noisy, but never meaningless. In an age when life was so fragile, a place that made people laugh, sing, fight, forgive, and sleep next to each other is not a tavern, but a small miracle. A miracle that comes not from God, but from people themselves. From resilience, from tolerance, from the desperate need to belong somewhere, even if only for a night, even if only by a dying fire. And that's what makes taverns timeless. Because wherever people need each other, there's always a tavern waiting to live on. And when you step out of the tavern in the morning, the newly risen sun shining on the damp stones beneath your feet, you may feel a dry throat, a foggy head, muddy shoes, and a bruise that comes from nowhere. But you're strangely warm inside. Because you've spent a night that wasn't simply about drinking or listening to stories. You've lived as part of something bigger. You have sat in a crowd of strangers and still felt accepted. You have laughed, you have told stories, you have been silent, you have clinked glasses, and even if only for a fragile moment, you have found a sense of belonging. The medieval tavern was not just a place where people went to get drunk, but a place where lonely hearts came together. In a world full of darkness, it was a flickering but persistent light. It was the clearest mirror reflecting the real life of the people of that time. Chaotic, rough, but full of life and humanity. There, sadness is not hidden, joy needs no reason, and people, whoever they are, have the right to tell a story, to listen to a song, and to sleep by the fire without fear. And perhaps, no matter how much time passes, no matter how civilized society is, we still need a tavern somewhere in life. A place for sharing, for laughter, for stories that are harmless but connect souls. A place that is not perfect, but real enough. Enough to live. And enough people. So if you ever have the chance to walk into a small room, filled with laughter, warm lights, and someone offers you a drink, don't refuse. Because who knows, it might be the modern version of a medieval tavern, where people's hearts still beat in the old but loving rhythm. It is the clearest mirror reflecting the real life of the people at that time. Chaotic, rough, but full of life and humanity. There, sadness is not hidden, joy needs no reason, and people, whoever they are, have the right to tell a story, to listen to a song, and to sleep by the fire without fear. And perhaps, no matter how much time passes, no matter how civilized society is, we still need a tavern somewhere in life. A place for sharing, for laughter, for harmless stories that connect souls. An imperfect place, but real enough. Enough life. And enough people. So if you ever have the opportunity to walk into a small room filled with laughter, warm lights, and someone offers you a drink, don't refuse. Because who knows, it might be the modern version of a medieval tavern, where people's hearts still beat in the old but loving rhythm. It is the clearest mirror reflecting the real life of the people at that time. Chaotic, rough, but full of life and humanity. There, sadness is not hidden, joy needs no reason, and people, whoever they are, have the right to tell a story, to listen to a song, and to sleep by the fire without fear. And perhaps, no matter how much time passes, no matter how civilized society is, we still need a tavern, somewhere in life, a place for sharing, for laughter, for harmless stories that connect souls. An imperfect place, but real enough. Enough life, and enough people. So if you ever have the opportunity to walk into a small room, filled with laughter, warm lights, and someone offers you a drink, don't refuse. Because who knows, it might be the modern version of a medieval tavern, where people's hearts still beat in the old but loving rhythm. If you are still lying in the soft darkness, the blanket has wrapped around your body, and the only sound is the fan blowing gently through the room, then let me continue to take you into a story that is both strange and familiar, like a gentle dream of the past. We continue to quietly step into the world of ancient Rome, but not through the glorious achievements or the mighty emperors. Rather, it is through the perspective of a person who is rarely mentioned, the person responsible for planning the wild parties. It may sound extravagant, even ridiculous, but in fact, it is a job that requires intelligence, sensitivity, and silent endurance. Because in Rome, parties are not simply about eating and drinking or having fun. It is the stage of power, where whispers decide the fate of lands, where a look can replace a throne. And behind the flickering light of the oil lamps, behind the laughter and the music, there is always a person who is never revealed, who silently calculates every dish, every scent, every seat, every sound of music, so that everything appears to be accidental, while in fact it is absolutely meticulously orchestrated. And you know, that person wakes up before dawn, touches the roof tiles, not because of passion, nor because of a high responsibility, but because of fear. Fear that the wine is not cold enough, that the mattress will collapse if a congressman is a little overweight, that two old lovers will accidentally meet and turn the party into a battlefield. Every morning of that person begins with confusion, and ends with a sigh that no one hears. So if you've ever felt tired of putting together the pieces of your life every day, if you've ever found yourself standing silently behind the lights, keeping things from falling apart, then perhaps you'll understand, and you'll relate to this character more than you think. Let this voice soothe you. Let your mind drift away from the calculations, the to-do lists, and drift gently into a place of old memories, where things are complicated, but also very human. Because even amid the lavish parties, hidden beneath the layers of glamour and sensuality, there is still a person trying to do his part. Just like you. And just like them, tonight, you deserve to breathe easy, let go of all the burdens in your mind, and fall into a deep sleep. While the sky is still immersed in the deep blue of dawn, a man opens his eyes not because of hard work, nor because of the crowing of a rooster. He simply cannot sleep. Anxiety had gripped him since the night. He was not a general, nor a powerful Roman official. He was in charge of one of the most fragile, messy, and vital things to the upper class, a wild party. And tonight, it was all about him. On the floor, the parchment lay a silent warning. He opened it, and was not surprised to find a message from his patron's wife. The last time, the roses had been the wrong color, yellow instead of red, and the evening had been a subtle insult to aristocratic taste. The wrong petals had shaken up the conversation at the table. People had noticed, and they hadn't forgotten. He'd barely finished his breakfast before he was faced with a series of problems knocking at the door of his mind. Complicated guests, chaotic schedules, possibly drunken performers, and situations where the smallest detail could lead to political scandal. Tonight's party was more than a party. It was a theater of power, a show of fame and envy, where a soft or hard pillow could change fate. And amid all the chaos, he knew one thing. His job wasn't to make the party perfect. It was to make the chaos look planned, letting guests laugh at the right times, sigh at the right places, and leave feeling like everything was natural, while behind him, he staved off a dozen meltdowns before they could explode. As the first light filtered through the windows, he rose, put on his rumpled tunic, and stepped into the day, not with relief, but with the slow pulse of someone accustomed to stress. Because tonight, his reputation and his survival would be placed at a long table, amid overflowing glasses and laughter that might not be real. It might seem like simply arranging chairs for a banquet, but for the planner in ancient Rome, it was a delicate, risky, and stressful art, where each name on the guest list carried a ticking time bomb of arrogance, animosity, and politics. You weren't just seating people, you were setting the stage, where every glance, laugh, and clink of glasses carried complex layers of prestige and rivalry. An uninvited guest could be seen as a public affront. A misplaced seat could rekindle old grudges. Not enough distance between two rival egos could spark a quarrel or a mid-feast scandal. Seating at a Roman banquet was not just a place to rest, but a status symbol, an unspoken statement of who was respected and who was overlooked. And then there were the ambiguous guests, the two who accompanied Dionysius, whose identities were never made clear. They could have been aristocrats, artists, gladiators, or even pets dressed in togas. But it was precisely this ambiguity that made the planner break out in a cold sweat, because any choice could be considered an insult. And so he had to orchestrate everything like a strategic dance, keeping exes apart, political rivals apart, important people at the center, not just because they loved the position, but because they needed it to maintain face. And while the guests sipped wine and whispered, the planner is constantly watching every move, every glance, ready to intervene if anyone slips out of place, literally or figuratively. The guest list may seem like a piece of parchment, but it is actually a map of spiderwebs of relationships. Even the slightest misstep can send the whole web reeling. But if all goes well, if everyone leaves the party with their honor, connections, and clothes intact, the planner can breathe a sigh of relief, if only for a moment, before preparing for the next party, with a whole new guest list and old dangers still smoldering, waiting to be awakened. In the shimmering atmosphere of a Roman banquet, where oil lamps reflect off marble walls and incense wafts silently amid hushed laughter, there is one thing that is always overlooked: the presence of the performers. But to the planner, they are a vital part of the party. Not because they are simply performing, but because every note, every dance, every silent gesture of the mime is a small thread that connects the emotions, honors, and ambitions of all the people present in that room. And each of those threads, if broken, can set off a chain reaction that no party, no matter how lavish, can control. Ironically, however, the people who carry that responsibility are the most uncertain souls. The flute girls do not know if they will wake up in time tomorrow morning. The mime couple is probably asleep somewhere in the red light district, and the dancers are arguing about the order of the stage, as if deciding the fate of a nation. The planner must not only call out each person's name on the list, but also call upon his own patience. But the difficulties do not stop there. Each guest is a universe of emotions, and the performer is the soundtrack to which you must adjust. A senator who loves classical music will be offended if a dancer appears in a costume that is too modern. A noblewoman will think that pantomime is child's play, while the person sitting next to her will regard it as the pinnacle of art. A dance that is too sensual will be seen as provocative, while a song that is too sad can rekindle some grudge from youth. And with just one mistimed glance, one off-key line, all that elegance will shatter like a wine glass dropped on a stone floor. In that world, the planner is not the director of a play, but the keeper of the balance between art and politics, between emotion and honor. They set the tone for every note, but are never shown. They are the invisible hand that regulates the pace of the night, keeping the candles from being blown out by the sudden winds of human commotion. And if the night ends well, when the last fingers leave the strings, when the last dance ends with a sigh of satisfaction, their only reward is oblivion. No one remembers who was behind it all. But that is the greatest achievement of all, creating a miracle without anyone knowing the magic. Only those who have stood in the shadows can understand how much silence is needed to shine so brightly. In the heart of the glittering city of Rome, where banquets were not simply places to eat and drink, but stages to display power and class, the banquet planner was like the conductor of a lavish symphony. For the evening to be something people would talk about with rapt eyes, everything from the food to the wine to the way the pillows were arranged had to be ritually precise. And so the battle began, in the kitchen. The food at Roman banquets was more than just nourishment. It was political messages wrapped in honey and imported spices. Every plate placed on the table was a statement that the host had the authority to serve such absurdities as the fragrant, nut-stuffed dormice, breathing oysters from the Bay of Baiae, or peacocks roasted whole and then pinned back to life. These dishes, though few actually wanted them, were served to remind that this was not dinner, but a statement in food. In the kitchen, it was a different battlefield. Cooks shouted, fires roared, and the smell of garum, a Roman fish sauce so strong it could make one cry, mingled with the smells of roasting meat, baking cakes, and molten fat. The planner walked through the chaos not to inspect each dish, but to forestall any disaster that might destroy the host's reputation. A slice of bread accidentally placed next to a jar of garum could make the whole table gasp, and then no one would remember the painstakingly prepared peacock, but only the haunting smell of the appetizer. And it wasn't just the food that had to be carefully chosen. The wine was part of the ritual too. The decanters had to be old enough to keep senators quiet while they drank, but there had to be a cheaper, discreetly marked decanter for latecomers or less important guests. Wine was also a tool of diplomacy. Who poured what, when, from where, all were political decisions disguised as politeness. Then, like a final touch to a painting, everything fell into place. The pillows were folded one last time. The cake was polished. The peacocks were placed on the table, their feathers shining like they had just stepped out of mythology. The aroma in the air was thick, not just from roast meat or honey, but from the very feeling of a grand night ahead. None of the guests knew the tension that had been building in the kitchen all day. No one needed to know. Because perfection was, in essence, about mistakes caught in time. And the planner, with his silent hands behind the curtain of luxury, understood that if no one complained, it meant everything had been done almost perfectly. And in that world of frivolity, that was the greatest reward. In the world of lavish Roman banquets where every sense was mobilized to impress, scent was more than just a decorative detail. It was an essential part of the experience, a silent but powerful sign of wealth, status, and sophistication. For Romans, the air around you spoke for you, and at a banquet, scent was the first thing that greeted guests before a greeting. Each space in the mansion had its own scent, carefully chosen as if the room itself had a personality. The entrance hall, where the first steps were made, was scented with citrus and cedar, bright, strong, clean, a silent declaration. You have entered a place not for the common man. The dining room, the triclinium, was filled with myrrh, frankincense, and light musk. It was a lingering, warm, sensual scent, just enough to dissolve the boundary between food and pleasure. The outdoor garden, where intimate conversations and secret love affairs took place, was scented with cinnamon, rose, and a touch of spikenard, scents that evoked sweet but dangerous secrets. Perfume was also used to conceal and transform easily overlooked places like the toilet. Nothing brings down a lavish party like an unpleasant odor lurking in a hidden corner. So even the toilets were scented with myrrh, rose oil, or at least incense, maintaining the illusion of luxury down to the smallest detail. For the Romans, scent was more than a pleasure. It was a form of silent language of calculated ostentation. A person without fragrance was a person without status. A room without fragrance was not ready to receive guests. And a party that doesn't smell, or worse, smells wrong, is a failure. So a party planner isn't just someone who knows how to arrange the lighting, the food, and the music. They're someone who can smell the air. Literally. They sniff every corner of the room, adjust every curtain, light every little incense burner, all to create an invisible mist that surrounds the party, one that makes guests feel at ease, not knowing why, but only that they don't want to leave. Because in a world where everything is a performance, scent is the silent backdrop to that drama. And if the planner has done her job right, the last thing that will be left behind when guests leave the party won't be a sight, but a whiff of scent on their clothes, and the vague feeling that they've just emerged from a dream. Under the dim light of oil lamps and the faint scent of pine resin mixed with roses, one often sees only a splendid Roman banquet. Noble guests reclining on silk cushions, laughing loudly over sparkling glasses of wine, and the sound of flutes and zithers resounded throughout the corridors. But few people imagined that, to make the party look natural, behind the scenes there was an invisible orchestra. Not of musical instruments, but of people. A silent army that operated all that luxury with silence, meticulousness, and sometimes even sacrifice. The wine bearer was not just the one holding the jug. They were experts in sensing the mood. They had to know when to pour more, when to pause. A glass of wine that was too strong could make a guest say something wrong. A glass that was too weak could dull his self-esteem. The fan bearer was not just the one creating the wind. They had to understand the temperature of the air and the atmosphere of the conversation. A light breeze on the back of the neck could make a smile appear, but a strong wind could blow away the silk covering the thigh, turning grace into shame. The fruit bearers were observers, eyes sharper than knives, for a bruised grape might cause a frown, and a frown from a distinguished guest was sometimes enough to get a servant transferred, even sold. The artists, dancers, musicians, these who were outwardly seen as symbols of glamour and art, were in fact souls who lived by the eyes of others. They were not allowed to tire. They were not allowed to miss a beat. They were supposed to make the audience forget the time. But they were never allowed to forget their duties. All these people, slaves, laborers, actors, they were the real backbone of every party. They did not work out of passion or choice. They were the hidden part of the iceberg, colder, heavier, and quieter. But that was also what made the iceberg strong. And the organizer, the silent conductor of the night of debauchery, they knew it. They knew that if a pear peeler was slow, if a cushion was too soft, if a piece of music was out of tune, the whole glittering world would collapse like a waking dream. They did not work for beauty. They worked to maintain the illusion of beauty. We often speak of Rome's decadence as something excessive, too extravagant. But behind that decadence were human machines, skinny hands peeling fruit, bare feet running in the dark to relight candles, chests gasping for breath while still smiling to serve. If Rome fell because of its infatuation with splendor, it was these anonymous people who kept it standing longer. It is a pity that history often does not write their names. But tonight, in this soft light, let us remember them. Those who carried an empire in silence. Under the soft light of the newly lit oil lamps, the whole Roman villa was immersed in a feeling of expectation. But before any guests cross that threshold, there is one final task, quiet but most important, that takes place in the shadows. It is the moment when the party planner makes a tour of every room, checking every detail so small it is almost invisible. Is a pedal tilted too far? Is the reflection of light on the wine decanter revealing an unwanted scratch? Or is the cushion on the sofa half an inch off its original design? Everything, the lighting, the scent, the floral arrangements, the softness of the cushions, is designed to trick the senses. The goal is not to make someone exclaim magnificent, but to make them think that the extravagance comes naturally, as if the place was born to seduce. This is the highest art of staging, making the elaborateness invisible, turning the preparation into an illusion of so-called elegance. It is also the moment when the organizer shifts from action to observation. They are no longer running. Instead, they take a step back, standing still in the world they have skillfully created. A world where every petal, every trace of scent, every ray of light has a reason to exist. They slow their breathing. They listen to the breeze from the garden through the silk curtains, smelled the scent of cinnamon in the air, and watched each lamp flicker like a breath. Because now, everything was done. There was nothing more to do. The doors would soon open. The people who entered, with their cloaks, their gossip, their eyes, would step onto a stage they did not know had been planned to the last detail. And it was in this final silence that the planner found a feeling that few people understood. A brief calm before the storm. A quiet beauty, like the last breath of day before nightfall. In that moment, everything was perfect. And if that was all it took for people to sit quietly for a moment, to take a deep breath, the party, even before it had begun, would have been a success. As the first guests entered the foyer, the atmosphere in the Roman villa seemed to change at once. It was not simply the beginning of a party, but the opening bell of a social drama, where every gesture, every greeting, carried a profound meaning. The early arrivals were not because they were eager to enjoy the luxury that awaited them, but because they wanted to assert themselves. They were the center, the people around whom the party seemed to revolve, and no one else. And while the dim light of the oil lamp still reflected on every fold of the toga, the planner, the one behind the perfect operation, was busy redrawing the seating chart. Silent calculations were made on the soft cushions. Who should sit next to whom to maintain harmony? Who should be isolated to avoid rehashing old grudges? Each chair was a chess piece, and one wrong position could ruin the whole situation. People did not sit just to eat. They sat to prove their status, to initiate a love affair, or sometimes to avenge an unsolved shame. Even wine, which is supposed to soothe the soul, cannot be served casually. For some, one drink is enough to make them impulsive. For others, it takes 4 to make them laugh. The planner, with a performer's intuition and a strategist's eye, must adjust the doses skillfully, disguising control as kindness. A heavier pitcher is given to those who need to be appeased. A lighter one is poured for those with a sharp tongue, all to keep the mood on track. And so, as the music rises, as greetings turn to laughter, it may seem to outsiders that this is a night of freedom and spontaneity. But in reality, it is a masterful orchestration, where every smile, every look, every drink is calculated. In a world where glory and disgrace are only a sentence away, the planner is the only one who cannot get drunk, cannot make mistakes, for he is the fragile line that keeps everything from turning into a party to a tragedy. As the night falls, the glasses are filled, the laughter begins to echo in the gilded domes, and the party changes. Away from the formal elegance and into another world, wilder, more real. The powerful guests, who once entered with calm and solemn demeanor, now begin to slip from the rules. Alcohol seeps into the bloodstream, softening pride and awakening instincts. Some recite poetry to the sound of strings. Others debate the fate of the empire, their eyes growing dim from the wine. The words become louder, the invitations more explicit, and secrets are exchanged with glances hidden behind the incense smoke. Amidst it all, the planner was not drunk, not confused, not gone. He was there, like a coordinator of this small universe of luxury. No one saw him clearly, but everyone felt his invisible hand in every detail. A lamp was adjusted to a softer light when the corner of the room became too harsh. A song was changed to a more cheerful tempo when the conversation began to lull, or a plate of grapes was brought out at the most opportune moment, not because of culinary necessity, but because it could interrupt a potential quarrel. The night passed like a strange dream, where all boundaries were blurred. Someone began to confide in a statue, with a longing gaze, as if it were an old lover. Under the table, a philosophical debate about the soul and desire took place between two people who had forgotten each other's identities. And in the corner of the yard, a dancer was crying because her dress was criticized as too short, or because of an unnamed loneliness. All this takes place in a chaotic universe kept in balance by the quiet presence of the organizer, who not only paves the way for the ecstasy, but also watches over it so that it does not go wrong. He is the conductor without a wand, the guardian of the rhythm of a wild night, so that things can be wild, can be chaotic, but still beautiful, like a dream long enough to be infatuated, and just awake enough to not regret when dawn comes.